Good evening, everyone. I'm your host, the founder of 360 Degree Ministries, where the love of Christ must come full circle. And this is this week's Friday feature. We're continuing in on our purpose driven unit. And the purpose of our unit is to talk about purpose. And last week we talked about an introductory perspective on purpose and the struggle in growing spiritually in the course of dealing with our purpose, identifying our purpose, and growing in our purpose, just from an introductory perspective. Well, this week we're going to do something a little bit different. We're going to talk about purpose from the perspective of what and who we allow in our world to hash out our purpose, to get done what we're supposed to get done. It's a very interesting kind of deal, don't you think? Well, in this interesting kind of deal, I have to ask one fundamental question. What does your people filter look like? Why do I ask that? Because there's certain principalities we have to look for in those that we surround ourselves with when we try to build our purpose. Everything gets done in the context of relationship, right? Well, not every relationship is good for us. So, in talking this week, the first interesting passage in scripture I want to give is out of James chapter 4. It's going to be verses 1 through 5. I'm going to be reading out of the English Standard Version. And the scripture goes as follows. Warning against worldliness. What causes quarrels and what causes fights among you? Is it not this, that your passions are at war within you? You desire and do not have, so you murder. You covet and cannot obtain, so you fight and quarrel. You do not have because you do not ask. You ask and do not receive because you ask wrongly to spend it on your passions. You adulterous people, do you not know that friendship with the world is enmity with God? Therefore, whoever wishes to be a friend of the world makes himself an enemy of God. Or do you suppose it is to no purpose that the scripture says, He yearns jealously over the spirit that He has made to dwell in us? Boy, that's powerful, man. Think about it. Now, James chapter 4 talks about things, and by things I mean principalities, the quarreling, the covetousness, the desires, the passions. But I charge you to look at it from this perspective. The people that we deal with, whether they are suitable to help us along with our purpose or unsuited rather, to help us along in our purpose, we have to check them for the principalities in them. We have to check for their hearts. We have to check for their behavior patterns. We have to check for their fruit. Matthew chapter 12 talks about the good fruit come from the good tree and the bad fruit come from the bad tree. Overflow of the heart, so the mouth speaks. We have to see what these folks are talking about. Think about it like this. We talk about people fighting and quarreling. Well, they're fighting and quarreling because they want something. They're fussing because they want something. There's no contentment in this passage. There's nothing about joy, godly contentment in this passage. Why would you want somebody like that on your team? They're eventually going to tear it up. Now, I'm not saying don't deal with these kind of folks, because Jesus wants us to engage folk, heal the sick spiritually and be able to help folk get better. But that's not necessarily the people you want on your team to help you along in your purpose. Those are the people that your team are going to go out there and help. There's a huge difference. And we have to understand what context people have to serve in our lives. People talk about, people were here for a reason, and here for a season, here for a lifetime. And as stereotypical as that sounds on the surface, there's actually some genuine merit to that. And whether somebody needs to be in your business for a reason, everybody's there for a reason, or for a season, or for a lifetime, well, that's ultimately up to the will of God. If we are spiritually healthy enough to obey what He has to say. Because if we aren't, we're going to do it based on what we want. And that's never really been much of a winning formula, now has it? Now, in continuing, in being able to identify the means by which we would discern what's good for us and what's not good for us, we'd have to use purpose. Now, purpose will determine what's good for us and not good for us, regardless of where the purpose is coming from. But God given purpose empowers us to desire God more. Because at some point, when we get in our purpose, we make it our aim to please Him. At first, we get excited about the purpose, but when, purpose has us taxed to the limit and worn out and we want to quit, it's only through godly contentment and the development of godly contentment that we get the true context of purpose. We have to understand that our God given purpose is not so that we can build a name for ourselves. God given purpose is so that we can use the gifts that we've been given from on high to amplify the name that is above every name. That's what that's for. But in dealing with our people filter, we need to find folk that are like that, don't we? Because if we deal with folk that are focused on earthly things, they're going to be focused on the brand. They're going to be focused on themselves. They're going to be focused on everything under the sun, but not the glory of God. Got to watch those folk. We talked about the heart. We talked about the fruit. We talked about the principalities in James chapter 4. Now let's talk about some more principalities in Matthew chapter 6. We talk about people where their hearts, where their hearts are, and how you would determine that is you would check their treasures. So Matthew chapter 6 verses 19 through 24 go, lay up your treasures in heaven. Do not lay up your treasures, do not lay up for yourselves treasures on earth, pardon me, where moth and rust destroy and where thieves break in and steal. But lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust destroys and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. The eye is the light of the body. So if your eye is healthy, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eye is bad, your whole body will be full of darkness. If then the light in you is darkness, how great is the darkness? No one can serve two masters, for he will either hate the one and love the other, or he will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and money. This passage is interesting for several reasons. First of all, when you talk about you cannot serve God and money, you could basically say you cannot serve God and. God don't need no help for the totality of reality. He doesn't need any help. And he doesn't want any partners in your praise and your worship. So whatever that passion is that's outside of God will drag you away from God. And if these are the people around you, you have to keep that in the appropriate context. But how would you be able to do that unless you understood your purpose? Which brings me to verses 22 and 23. If your eye is healthy enough to understand what God has to say about you in your life and what He's gifted you to do and what He's commanded you to do to glorify Him, your whole body will be full of light. You will not only be an example to all those around you, but your eye is healthy. You'll have the comprehension to see. That's the Ephesians chapter 1 verse 15 through 19 piece. You'll be able to discern these things. And this is the context by which your purpose would develop. Because as your purpose develop, it will serve as its own people filter. Because initially you got good versus bad, but eventually you got good versus what's best. Not everything that's good is what's best. And you have to understand that. Feeding the hungry is always a good thing, right? But is it always the best thing to do? Maybe at a particular time, we would be best using our gifts elsewhere. Not everyone, obviously, because God's going to make sure that the folk that are beleaguered like that are getting taken care of. But for a given time, maybe he'll send person B to go feed the hungry. Maybe he'll send person A to go work on a website for the company that's going to go feed the hungry. And maybe the next day, person A will go feed the hungry, and then person B will get on the radio waves and talk about the spot. Everybody's in their gifts. Everybody's focused on glorifying God. Everybody has a healthy eye, and they have that light, and they have that discernment. We have to understand what's good for us. We have to understand what's not so good for us, and we have to understand what's best. Now, I'm going to close out with, for this week at least, with another piece. And it's very interesting how the header goes. Flee sexual immorality from 1 Corinthians chapter 6 verse 12. And it's very interesting that that's there, because that's usually the principality that drives people away from their purpose the most. It's the sexual immorality. It's the most common thing that drags us away. That's why it's all over the epistles. But the verse goes, all things are lawful for me, but not all things are helpful. All things are lawful for me, but I will not be dominated by anything. And what I want to close with is that to the extent that you are dominated by something will be the extent that you can't hear from God, and the extent that you can't obey God. Because even in the context of being obedient and submissive to God, you still have your freedom. God will allow you to be free to do as you will. That's why it says all things are lawful, but not all things are helpful. Those unhelpful things will take dominion over you and take you away from purpose, but more importantly, it'll take you away from the King. And these things that may dominate you, they may come from the people in your world. So while you still have to go serve those people that aren't necessarily that good for your purpose, you have to make sure not to get all buddy with them and allow the stuff that's in them to influence you. Remember, we belong to the King. When we walk in the room, we should be the most powerful thing in the room. Don't let yourself be dominated by things. Next week, we're going to talk about specific principalities in identifying what's good for our purpose and bad for our purpose. We talked about the people today. We're going to talk about the principalities in further detail next week. Weekend Encouragement will be posted at its normal time-ish. A bit of a window, but it'll be posted in a timely fashion on Saturday. But other than that, thank you guys for listening, and I wish you all a great week.